Hello, everyone, and welcome to Baker & McKenzie's Labor and Employment video chat series, The Employer Report. The Employer Report is our series of chats focused on hot topics in the workplace. This is where you'll hear quick, practical tips from Baker attorneys on today's most pressing issues for employers as we all navigate the new normal. My name is Robin Samuel, and I'm an employment attorney in the firm's Los Angeles office. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Melissa Elchen from our Chicago office and Harry Villette from our New York office. Melissa is a partner in the firm's Global Immigration and Mobility Practice Group, and Harry is a partner in the firm's Data Privacy Group. Today, I'm going to talk to Melissa and Harry about vaccine passports, what they are, how they're being used, what employers should keep in mind if they use them, and related data privacy concerns. So with that, Melissa, if you can kick us off by telling us a little bit about vaccine passports. What are they and how are they being used?
Sure, Robin, thanks. So a vaccine passport is documentation proving that an individual has been vaccinated against COVID-19. And despite what we might think of when we hear the word passport, it's not a little booklet. It actually is a digital format. So users can pull them up on their phone as an app or part of their digital wallet as a quick way to verify that the individuals are vaccinated against COVID-19. A digital travel pass has been developed by the International Air Transport Association that would allow travelers to upload their documents, their vaccination documents, and also confirm entry requirements when traveling to another country. Versions in development may also allow people to show recent negative test results, biometric data, and other health-related data to potentially facilitate travel. Proving vaccination in order to travel is not a new concept. So every country has its own requirements, including government-determined health standards to be admitted into that country. For example, several countries already require proof of a negative COVID test for entry. Also, for years, people have traveled internationally carrying what are called international certificates of vaccination or prophylaxis, known as yellow cards, proving they've been vaccinated against diseases such as like yellow fever or rubella. And the CDC still urges people traveling to certain countries to carry the yellow cards. But what's different here is that this is a digital passport to prove vaccination, which is new. And use of a vaccine passport to prove COVID-19 vaccination to travel freely to enter another country would be a game changer. There's broad appeal from public and private sectors to restore travel and potentially eliminate the need for quarantine. As we'll discuss, however, use of vaccine passports raises several concerns.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all looking forward to getting back to being able to travel soon. Do you have any idea of whether these vaccine passports are already being used or are they still being in development?
So they are being used domestically, but they're not being used yet to cross borders. So right now, all eyes are on Israel and its Green Pass. So Israel, as has been discussed on these before, leads the world in vaccination rates. And they've launched what's called a Green Pass for its citizens vaccinated against COVID-19. So think of it as a digital domestic COVID vaccine certificate. So the Green Pass is being used to gain citizens exclusive access to bars and restaurants, gyms, leisure facilities, and venues that are not currently open to the public. So it's available to anyone in Israel who's received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. And it's not available to people who've recovered from COVID but have not been vaccinated. The Green Pass makes it easier for pass holders to travel domestically. They're not allowed to follow COVID-19 safety restrictions, such as isolating if they come into contact with a confirmed infected patient, or after international travel from a COVID-19 red zone or other countries with high infectious rates. But while it is a domestic travel passport, it could open up pass holders freedom to travel internationally. Right now, Cyprus and Greece announced plans to admit Green Pass holders from Israel. And of course, while there are many caveats with the Green Pass, it has been viewed as a test case of how countries can use digital passports to open up their countries to their own citizens and their own borders to international travelers.
Thanks, Melissa. Harry, when you hear about people using a vaccine passport in a digital format on a smartphone, what are some of the privacy concerns that come to mind?
Yeah, well, thanks, Robin, for having me on the event here. It's great to join you and to be a part of this conversation. I mean, there's a few thoughts that come to mind. Obviously, this is part of a global movement, and there's some practicalities to bear in mind. But I think there's something to be thought through in the way it's done, right, and what you take into account. So I think it's all very feasible, but a lot of it's going to depend on the types of systems that are envisioned for this type of framework and how the information that we're collecting is stored, and actually what type of information, right? Because as Melissa was saying, I think there's going to be some variety in the needs of the various countries. And I think historically that's been all very acceptable because it's been in the form of documents or paper that, it can be limited as to who has access to that. You can either stuff it next to your passport, or you can kind of request it from an authority, either a doctor, a physician, or some other office. And it's kind of kept in some sort of contained environment. As you take things electronically, as you load them into a digital format or a vaccine passport and a wallet, it starts to really get difficult as to, number one, who's developing the wallet, right? As like technically, not just a framework or the idea, but who's the app developer? Is it a collaboration between government and private sector to develop it? In some ways, similar to the way in the US, we see TSA collaborating with private sector to develop trusted traveler programs, or is it something that is simply, widely available in the market for a fee? And then what's done with that information? What laws are they bound by? That standard setting, I think, is also going to be a challenge, particularly because of the needs and the laws of the various countries. So when I hear international, I hear like really aspirational in some ways, but I think once it gets down to implementation, it's going to present some challenges. The one challenge that jumps immediately is this voluntary or is it mandatory? So if you're in the voluntary zone, right, which I think you kind of have to if you're deploying this globally, what's the alternate if I don't want to participate in that? Like if I liken something to the way we've seen on the TSA side, if you submit to the Trusted Traveler Program, you get the benefit of going through faster, right? You don't have to take your shoes off, for example. But if you don't, then you just have to go through some additional burdens, right? So what that would look like is different than saying everybody has to have this vaccine passport and come what may and everything else. So the one other thing I'll throw out there is sustainability and authenticity. You're going to have issues as to, again, with anything digital token, there's an opportunity for compromise. And so the fact that Harry has a vaccine passport, how will you know that I didn't compromise that? And just to show that I took the vaccine and get the benefit of that having the vaccine affords me without actually taking it, right? Because maybe I have concerns about doing that. Maybe I have some reservations. And so the authenticity, and obviously I think if it's more private sector, you could have concerns with if the system goes down, right? The app is not available. You're about to enter a port of entry, or you don't have connectivity, and suddenly, you have latency issues, and you're not being allowed into a port of entry, which is different from having a document or a passport that you have and you can show, and it's with you at all times, and it's just going to work. So, kind of in wrapping up that thought, I would just say, I think whatever the approach, it should keep in mind the fundamental rights that are associated usually with privacy, again, data protection and the prevention of surveillance and any sort of stigmatizing that comes along with being vaccinated or not being vaccinated, because it could be a reason. There's identifiable reasons why certain folks should not take the vaccine, and so what that would mean for them, it just needs to be kind of thought through.
Yeah, you hear quite a bit these days about blockchain and whether that's going to prove to be a reliable mechanism for these passports or not.
Yeah, and even there are concerns with the deployment of that and the sustainability of that and who hosts it. So the conversation, I think, is very timely, and it's certainly appropriate to have, but it's a multifaceted conversation.
Yeah.
So I think maybe I should turn the tables here on you, Robin. Maybe ask you a question if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Fire away.
So I'm, from an employer perspective or employment perspective, I think it's interesting as well. What's going to happen moving forward, right? So if I have a vaccine passport, or if I've taken the vaccine, how does that play out in the context of either recruitment or promotion or participation in in-person, events and meetings? We all are really just starving for interaction and want to be reunited in some way or form. Does that have implications if employers start to say, yeah, you want this role, but I need to see that you have the vaccine because it's going to involve some travel, maybe 40%, and it's just simply going to be practically easier if you have that. So how would that play out in the employment context?
Hey, that's a great question. I think the issue of vaccine passports and enabling employers to kind of segregate employees based on whether they have a passport or they've been vaccinated or not is still to be worked out. But it largely, I think, will involve the kind of same mandatory versus voluntary standard that you addressed in the privacy context just a minute ago, and having an alternate mechanism available for employees who are not vaccinated or who don't have a passport to use to gain the benefits of employment that others who have been vaccinated would have access to. And outside the US, it's a very complicated scenario. It's, country specific, obviously. Within the US, fortunately, we do have some good guidance on this topic that I think employers can use. The ADA, federal discrimination statute that prohibits discrimination against disabilities, says that employers can have what are called qualification standards, which is a requirement that an individual not pose a direct threat to the health or the safety of other individuals in the workplace. If a qualification standard, such as a vaccination requirement or a passport requirement, screens out or tends to screen out individuals with disability, however, the employer has to show that the unvaccinated employee would pose a direct threat due to a significant risk of substantial harm to the health or safety of the individual, himself or herself, or to others, and that direct threat cannot be eliminated or reduced by some reasonable accommodation. So really what that means is that employers will have to go through an individualized assessment. They'll have to look at things like the duration of the risk, which I think is going to change here pretty quickly, hopefully, as more people get vaccinated and the case rates continue to drop. It's one thing to say now that any employee would pose a direct threat to your workplace if they're not vaccinated. Middle of summer, I'm not so sure that's the case anymore if the rates of transmission in new cases have dropped substantially. Besides the duration of the risk, I think employers need to look at the nature and severity of the potential harm. And so therefore you have to consider, well, if you're worried about unvaccinated employees being a risk to others in the workplace, if those others have been vaccinated and the data shows that vaccinated employees are not at substantial risk because these vaccines are proving to be very effective, then maybe an unvaccinated employee is not a substantial risk to those employees. That's still to be worked out. I think we don't have the data yet. The science isn't there, but it's coming. And then I think employers also have to look at the likelihood that potential harm will occur and the imminence of the potential harm as well. And if you conclude that there's a direct threat based on all of those factors, you would be able to exclude employees who are not vaccinated from the worksite under the ADA and also under most state law. But that doesn't mean you can terminate them. You can't fire them right off the bat. You would have to see if you could accommodate them in some other way, such as allowing them to work while wearing safety equipment like PPE, masks, physical separation, the 6 feet, physical barriers, et cetera. Or if they can work remotely, you're going to have to look at each situation and make an individual assessment as to that situation. So, you know, I think there's still a lot to be worked out in that space, but we have the kind of the general framework for making those decisions, at least in the US.
Yeah, I think this is kind of all happening, I think, in real time. I mean, and as I'm listening to you, I am just remembering even conversations that I've been a part of where folks are saying, you know, they're walking through their experience and saying, look, I had COVID-19, and so I have a high level of antibodies, but I'm still interested in taking the vaccine because I want the benefits associated with it. So there's whenever you kind of put certain benefits out there for a certain category of folks, you're in some ways inherently giving them an advantage, right? And so again, if you're in sales and previously part of your job was to have in-person meetings, visit with clients, enter their facilities and walk through that, you're inherently feeling that you're going to have an advantage if you can show a passport and get into facilities that are not part of, you know, your own necessarily, but to engage and interact and do that sort of thing that we all used to do and take for granted before COVID.
Yeah, there's no doubt. You know, customers will be more comfortable with employees who have the passport than employees who don't. But that, I don't think, will relieve the employer of their obligation to try to find accommodations that work for all employees. Because again, not every employee will be able to be vaccinated. There are good medical reasons why some employees won't be able to be vaccinated. There are also religious reasons that employers may have to consider and potentially accommodate here. So I certainly agree with you. You know, the employees that have the passport will have probably greater benefits and access, but employers are still going to have to work with those who don't to try to get them reasonable accommodations.
Now we talked earlier, or at least I think I noted the distinction between the move and the transition from, as Melissa noted, you know, these types of certifications have been around forever, but as we kind of transition that over to a digital platform and turn them into vaccination passports and part of digital wallets, obviously you step in now on the employer side. So just specific to you, Robin, if you're storing that on a employer-owned device, that passport itself, I mean, what could you think of by way of steps that employers could take to limit and manage privacy risk that could be associated with having that on a company-owned device?
Well, I guess, you know, the first question I'd have is whether a vaccine passport constitutes medical information, and it could, and if so, there might be, you know, an employer obligation to protect the confidentiality of that information and make it available to only those employees who have a need or a business reason to access it. So you have to think through things like who's going to have access to this passport if it is stored on the employer device. Is it the entire IT department, or is it some subset, or is it somehow locked down so only HR can access it? I think you've also got a disability accommodation issue again there. I'm not so sure you want to have employees who have been vaccinated have the ability to pull up a barcode or something on their screen that they can use to easily gain access to the building, while employees with disability who don't have that have to go through some longer or more extensive process of getting access to the building. So you want to think about giving employees with disabilities something equal, like a barcode or scan, if they have complied with other safety steps. And then, of course, when the relationship ends and you get your device back, or the employee keeps that phone or tablet, what are you going to do with that information that's stored on there? Are you going to auto delete it or give it to the employee? You know, I can imagine they'd want to keep their passport, their electronic passport, but there's some privacy issues I see there. So.
Yeah, the one thought I'll share as well, just to close out that great list that you set out, Robin, is again, this may also play out into the how, right? How something like this is deployed, because if the data is not stored on the device itself, maybe it's an app that then has to ping a server. elsewhere. In some ways, to me, I think that also mitigates a lot of the risk for the employer, because the data itself, you know, whether it's medical or not, which you raise is I think you raised that good question about, maybe matters less, because it's just an app that's going to ping a server. And again, if that server is to like a government-based collaboration, and I cite TSA, Trusted Traveler, as just as familiar framework, then the risk to the employer, I think, becomes really minimal. So more to come, I'm sure, on that.
Yep, for sure. So Melissa, this one's for you. Other than the Green Pass in Israel and the possibility of employers using vaccine passports, are you aware of any other countries or entities that are considering using vaccine passports?
Yeah, there are. And just to pick up on the points you both raised, what I find interesting as an immigration practitioner is that really the vaccine passport, I mean, it does have passport in its name, so it suggests, you know, trusted traveler programs, but really some of the versions that are out there being developed are using like solely domestically, right, to gain access to sort of like just like public places. And that's what we're seeing in Israel. But countries are certainly keen to take advantage of being able to use the vaccine passport to open their borders, like I said earlier. Earlier this year, President Biden in the US issued an executive order asking government agencies to assess the feasibility of linking COVID-19 vaccines to the ICVs, to the kind of like a digital version of the yellow card. And this week, the European Commission has announced plans for kind of an EU-wide vaccine certificate. So there could be more freedom of movement within the EU based on their own version of the digital Green Pass. Other countries like France, Denmark, Sweden, countries in the Asia-Pacific region have also talked about either launching their own kind of version of the vaccine passport, the digital version, or having some other documentation, whether it be kind of like a scanned version of a document, or perhaps a paper document that can supplement the digital version. So we're seeing a lot of that really come to the fore. And what's interesting is that it's from different perspectives. I mean, some of it is related to kind of being able to facilitate travel, but you know, as Harry talked about, I mean, to what extent is the scope of that data being collected? Because from an immigration perspective, the IATA version of the travel pass would expand to include biometrics data, to expand to include visa, passport information. And so it really broadens the scope of what's on your phone to be able to present for entry into another country. So I do think we'll see more countries roll out their own domestic versions of vaccine passports in the coming months. But I think that sort of widespread use of vaccine passports for international travel remains to be seen, because it's very nuanced. I mean, to think about the globalized standard for vaccinations and also thinking about access to different countries. I mean, you know, hopefully we're in a place where in certain countries, like in our country, you know, it might be that, you know, the vaccine timeframe is much shorter than for other countries around the world, where it can extend to 2022, 2023. And so it really brings up questions of sort of like the global rollout of vaccinations, and also just other implications of, you know, those countries and those individuals, to the points you both raised, those individuals who are unable or unwilling to get a vaccine, and what that means for them. So I will also mention that last month, the World Health Organization stated that there are critical unknowns about vaccine efficacy in reducing transmission. So basically, it would be premature from their perspective to implement vaccine passport requirements for international travelers. So I guess really it comes down to time will tell. I mean, it's one thing is for sure, and I read this in an article the other day. I mean, it took so long for sort of there to be a global agreement on just digitizing like aspects of your passport, right? So, I mean, it's really, COVID has accelerated that drive to digitize travel documents and to streamline entry requirements. I'm not exactly sure we're going to see that as it relates to international travel and COVID vaccine passports, but overall, it could make for a better travel experience for everyone in the new normal. So I have one final question for you, Harry. What data privacy concerns should people keep in mind when using vaccine passports potentially for international travel?
Yeah, I think, and thank you for that, Melissa. I think that overview was spot on. I think you raise a lot of the same concerns that I think I would have. I think that for me, it may then ultimately boil down to access, right? So if you're fundamentally simply showing a device and somebody, basically barcodes it and it's just a confirmation of something, if the data itself is still stored in your home country or in some environment that's considered adequate or safe, I think it's less of an issue than when something is actually being accessed by the foreign jurisdiction and what that access might mean. Sometimes we've all have seen issues come up in the context of maybe travel to China in certain jurisdictions where you have to actually, submit your device, whether it was a laptop, and turn over access controls, whether those were passwords or everything else, so that they can run a search for all kinds of government related reasons. That gets more on the intrusive side. And then again, you go back over to maybe something far more familiar with simply a scan of a authorized, like we got in the States here, where it basically tells you the type of vaccine that you got, whether it's Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or Pfizer, and the date that you got it, and it's simply a scan of that, and you're showing it. And obviously, I think even airlines may have a role to play in that process, as they have with Trusted Traveler programs, where they're the ones who are just going to take in the info and somehow present it as validated to authorities, because I think they have that relationship, that interface, those systems that are kind of already set for that. And it's just one more facet, one more element that they're including. So I think, as you said correctly, it's still all unfolding. And I think it is important to at least start now to think through what it means for your business, what it means for your organization. If you're heavily relying on agents or individuals to travel, I think this is really spot on. And all the things that we've talked about here are worthy of note.
Yeah, it certainly seems that a lot of this will be driven by convenience, as most things in life are. And once people realize the advantages of easy access, they'll be more willing to perhaps tolerate some of the privacy and employment-related issues we've touched on. So anyway, thank you again for joining me, Melissa and Harry, as we address this topic. I know we ran over our usual time, but it's a fascinating topic and well worth the extra few minutes here.
I think we can go on and on, Robin. This is the shortest we can go.
That's right. For our audience, we hope you will watch the other videos in the series, which are shorter, but we do share insight into various employment-related issues. And thank you again.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.